to zoonotic diseases, the first thing to understand is what does it mean? According to the CDC, it's an infection or infestation shared in nature by man and lower vertebrate animals. Well, that's just kind of a catch-all. It doesn't really explain what zoonotic disease is. The World Health Organization says that it is a disease that is transmitted or infection transmitted between vertebrate animals and man. So it comes from animals to people. That's what a zoonotic disease is. Reverse zoonosis is people to animals, okay? When we look at our responsibilities, because we understand this, we have to make sure that clients will allow a disease to get diagnosed. I mean, that's one of the things that happens. But then, if there's an animal disease that is transmissible to man, then the client needs to understand there has to be steps to protect, to decrease the potential for transmission. Now, how many of you guys have ever heard a veterinarian or anybody talk about zoonotic risks to a client?
Never.
Never. That to me is unconscionable, because there are so many things that could transmit from animals to people, especially if little kids are involved. They're really bothers me. So we have to do a better job of this, and we're going to have to do a lot better job because human physicians don't understand parasitology nearly as well as veterinarians do. I promise you, you go ask a human physician about visceral bulbar migrans, and they're going to say, oh, I have no idea what parasite even causes that, or even how is it transmitted. The veterinarians understand that. So a lot of times the veterinarians are telling the client, this is what you got to do, this is how you have to do this. A lot of times clients are going to talk to you first, so you have to understand it as well. Now, when there is ever a possibility of a zoonotic infection, that means it's in a person now, then you got to tell them, go see a doctor. You got to go get this taken care of, because as a veterinarian, I can't prescribe anything. I can't diagnose it for you. I'm probably right, but I can't diagnose it because I'm not a human physician. Now, staff or you, obviously, the diagnosis aspect is something that you can't do, that I can. However, you can communicate. You can pass that information on to the client so we can decrease the potential for transmission. So, the zoonotic parasites, the ones that you really have to know, are the ones with the OK sign. Okay? So, when we look at that, Toxicara canis or cat-eye. Balis ascaris, we've already talked about that. That's one that's in raccoons, but that's not as a big deal, especially here because there are no raccoons here. Hookworms, you got to know hookworms. Two different kinds. There's ancylostoma and uncinarea. And then strongyloides, we talked a little bit about it. We'll get into a little more here, but you do have to know about Trichinella spiralis, because trichinosis can be a devastating illness in people. Dimorphilaria immitis, or heartworms, it's really uncommon in people. They can get it. You get abnormal migrations of the microfilaria. But because we don't have a real big heartworm problem here, you probably don't need to worry about it as much. Now, if you were to move to a place like Louisiana or Florida, big difference. Now you've got to know that. When it comes to cestos, the teeniest species, the two of them we talked about, Solium and Sazonata, and then Echinococci. Those are big and important tapeworm problems in people. Hymenolithus, just enough to know about. When it comes to trematodes, it's the schistosomes that we're concerned about. Not the flat, leaf-looking type trematodes. The schistosomes are the blood fluid. And then finally, the protozoans, Toxoplasma gondii, Cryptosporidium. Okay? Those are the ones you really need to know. So we'll start out with Toxicara canis. You guys know about it, you know what parasite it is, you know its life cycle and all that stuff. But when it comes to getting into people, all they have to do is ingest the eggs, okay? Sometimes the eggs are in the dirt. So if the little kid's out playing in the dirt, the puppy's out there defecating in the dirt, now all of a sudden the kid puts his fingers in his mouth and he's got it, okay? Young puppies and kittens, especially if they come in on a puppy mill from out of the state, there's a good chance they've got toxicarium. If they handle it and put their fingers in their mouth, they can explode. When it gets into people, it can cause toxoparalarval migrans or visceral larval migrans. That means that little baby worm is now crawling around inside their body someplace. Okay? Occasionally, because it has that stage that can go through the blood, it can get in your eyeball. And then you end up with worms in the eye, and that can lead to blindness. Symptoms of it, if people get it, they get fever, they get eosinophilia, and you guys all know that now because of lymphatic anatomy. Eosinophils are one of the primary white cells that are seen in high levels of parasites. So it's eosinophilia. If it gets into the lungs, it can now cause asthma-like signs and pneumonitis. And then if it gets into the eyeball, it can cause blindness. So it's really important that we know about this. And then we make sure people are cleaning up after their dogs and their cats, especially puppies and kittens. Not just cleaning it up and then putting it in the garbage can for someone else. Wrap it up in a bag or something, tie it up. Make sure the owners know. Anytime an owner or a potential pet owner would come into me and say, what kind of dog would you suggest I get for my kids? I say, well, it doesn't matter to me, but you need to know some things about getting dogs and cats with little kids. Little kids put everything in their mouth. If your dog or cat has worms, a little kid can get it. It can be pretty devastating. So they need to understand that stuff. If there's a possibility, and believe me, when somebody comes in and looks you in the eye, you see a worm crawling around in the anterior chamber, I know what it is, but I'm not going to do anything. They got to go see their doctor. Bayless ascaris, again, is the one with raccoons, okay? And you have to eat the egg from the raccoon feces, which usually means it's from a soil contaminant. These eggs are extremely resistant. The problem with Bayless ascaris is when those little worms get inside of us, they get into the brain. They start migrating around in the brain and can cause everything from just being really stuporous to a full-out coma or death. Bayless ascaris is pretty bad. If they get into just the visceral organs, it causes fever and causes eosinophilia, but the potential for getting into the brain is really bad. So there shouldn't be pet raccoons. I see these things on YouTube or whatever about a guy sitting on his porch at nighttime covered in raccoons. He thinks it's cool. It's not cool. He's running the risk for serious problems because who knows which of those raccoons has Bayless ascaris. Or I saw somebody open into their house and there's a raccoon in the house. And he left the back door open. And it's chasing them down the hallway. I'd run like crazy. Not only could it be Bayless ascaris, it could be rabies for all I know. And then if there is a possibility of having a raccoon that might be a pet or might be something that you're working around like in a zoo, make sure you treat the raccoon for groundworms. If people get it, obviously they got to go see a doctor. Hookworms, on the other hand, are different. Hookworms, that's pretty common, especially in places where hookworms are common, like in the south country, the states, southern states, sometimes in the Midwest, but usually in places where there's a lot of moisture. These larvae, these little hookworm larvae, if they get into or touch the skin, they actually will penetrate the skin. And we're talking about cutaneous larval migrans. And you can see the pathway of those worms crawling around in the skin. And as long as they're crawling around, they're creating a severe inflammatory response. And it really itches. Okay? Now, if they get into the intestines, they have a complete life cycle. So now you got hookworms in there. So not only is it cutaneous larval migrans, but it can also cause complete hookworms inside the GI tract. The prevention is, if there's pets and you live in that kind of area, they should be routinely tested for the presence of hookworms. Clean up after the pets. Make sure that fecal material is getting cleaned up and taken care of. And then don't allow your skin to come in contact with sandy, moist soils. I would never, ever go down to the Gulf Coast states, anywhere down there, and walk around on the beach barefoot. You're just asking for it. And I'm certainly not going to go sit on the beach. The next thing I know, my rear end's going to be itching. And it's going to look really funny. If they get it, if somebody, believe me, people will do really weird things with veterinarians. I had some guy come in once, he realized what I was. There's a whole bunch of, it's a singles thing. I wasn't single, I was just there to be a chaplain. All these women are over there, and this guy comes up to me, grabs the shirt, and goes, "Look, what's this?" What do you think all those women thought of this guy? Think they're going to go out with him? Not a chance in Hades, man. He just had signed his death warrant when it came to dating. But the other thing is, I can't tell him what it is. He's going to go see a doctor. All right, Strongyloides stercoralis. Again, that's one that the larva will penetrate the skin, and then once it gets in, it can migrate anywhere in the body. If Strongyloides gets into the lungs, it causes lung disease, respiratory disease. If it gets into the intestines, diarrhea. If it gets where it becomes auto-infected, it goes round and around, that can actually become fatal. Clean up after pets, that's really important, okay? And people, theoretically, because people can get it, they can pass it if they've got the disease. Make sure the owners understand what this is. They've got to go see a doctor and get it treated. Pets can be tested. Routine fecal exams can find out if they have this strongyle. All right, now we get to another one of the really important ones, and that's Trichinella spiralis. The disease is called trichinosis. This is because of eating poorly cooked pork or meat from something like bears or wild game. Another animal that would eat garbage-like things, okay? Trichinosis, it all depends on how many larvae are ingested. Once it gets into the GI tract, it can cause enteritis and GI pain, you get cramps. But then, once it starts getting generalized and gets out into the muscles, now remember, trichinosis, or the Trichinella organism, insists in muscle. And now you start having muscle pain and muscle aches. If it insists into your heart, now you get myocarditis. And then pneumonia if it gets into the lungs. And then if it gets up into the brain, now you got encephalitis. Trichinosis is bad stuff. To prevent it, make sure pork is cooked properly. Don't ever eat raw pork. Now we're lucky because they have inspectors, but that still doesn't mean you can do that. Freezing meat for 20 days at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is how much lower is that than freezing? 27 degrees lower than freezing temperature. So it's really cold. So freeze it for 20 days and that'll kill those things, okay? Or irradiate them with x-rays or gamma rays, okay? If people think they have it, you know, they tell you about some of those signs, and they talk about going up and killing the pig in the backyard and bringing it in and cooking it and eating it, you better send them to a doctor. Trichinella or trichinosis is reportable. If we see it, pigs, we have to report it, okay? All right, heartworms. Obviously, transmission is through mosquito bites. The microfilariae are not injected into the body. They are deposited on the surface of the skin, and then they can kind of wiggle their way down through the penetration site. Okay? Once they get in, they start getting into the blood. They can get into the lungs and cause pulmonary dirofilariasis. And then you get these nodules in the lungs. And there's a human X-ray that has heartworm in his lungs. Okay? Obviously, the best way to prevent this in people is to try to keep the dogs from getting it. Make sure that the dogs are treated because the dog is the definitive host. If a mosquito bites a dog that's infected, now that mosquito can come out and bite you a while later, now you can get it. Okay? Control of mosquitoes is important. I don't know if you guys have lived in places where mosquitoes are fairly common, but I've seen trucks driving down the street with fogging going out to try to kill mosquitoes, okay, to try to get rid of the mosquito population because of the diseases. And then if you're going to go into an area that has mosquitoes, put some mosquito repellent on you so that they're not going to bite you. Obviously, they have to go and see a doctor. Even a suspected case should go and figure this out because that's the doctor's job. All right, cestodes, we started out with the Tinea saginata. Remember, in this case, the primary or definitive host is who? People are the definitive host, okay? With saginata, we're talking about cattle as the intermediate host. So it's that cow is the intermediate host, and they have this organism inside of the meat because it gets out into the meat. And we eat poorly cooked beef, then we've got it, okay? The tapeworm, basically, once you get it inside, it gets non-specific. You kind of might have cramps, you might feel nauseous or wild, but that's about it. But then when you start seeing proglottids pass out of the stool, that's a pretty good indicator you got a problem. But what happens with people is they are people out there, usually in third world countries or where there's not as much sanitation, and they're out defecating in the ground. And then the cows come along. The cow comes along, eats the grass, it's got the proglottid, the worm on it, the tapeworm egg. They get it, now it gets inside of them, and that's how it transmits. Okay? So, that's why we have meat inspectors. This is pretty easy to see. Okay? Those little white nodules in the meat. Okay? And that's why they call it measly beef. Freezing meat for a long period of time can kill it, but proper cooking also kills it. If people have it, obviously, they got to go to see the physician. Tinea solium is basically the same thing, but now it's pork and not necessarily beef. Okay? Pigs eat the eggs that come out of people because people are the definitive host. Inside the pig, this thing hatches and it gets out and gets into the muscle. And then people eat poorly cooked pork. Non-specific signs again, okay, that's pretty much what you're going to see. Proglottids are going to get passed out. Now, the intermediate host, no, those things can migrate into lots of different places. They can migrate up into the brain, they can migrate other places, and then that can cause clinical signs because of where they're at. Obviously, meat inspectors work, freezing meat works, and properly cooking the pork is really important. If people have it, they gotta go and see their doctor. Echinococcus granulosus, that's one that's really a big problem because this creates hydatid disease. With Echinococcus granulosus, the hydatid disease is this fluid-filled cyst. It's very thick wall, and it's got lots of little protoscolices inside of that cyst, okay? And that thing can be very large. I've seen pictures of them this big around inside of an abdomen, and they're just full of these little tapeworms. The size of the cyst and the location of the cyst dictates what's going to happen in a person, okay? And obviously the guy up there getting one taken out of his skull, that would mean he had some pretty bad problems while it was in there. Even after, because once he took it out, his brain is still compressed, okay? Prevention is obviously wash your hands before you put them in your mouth. Dogs should never be given any kind of viscera from an animal to eat, especially with granulosis, because that's where they go into. Those little immature tapeworms get in there, and if the dog eats that, then now the dog's going to get the tapeworm and they're going to continue the cycle, okay? And then rodents, okay? We don't want rodents to go out and pick up these hydatids and then have a dog come and eat the rodent, because that can pass it as well. This is reportable. If you have a dog that has echinococcus, it has to be reported to the federal government, because they're going to try to figure out where did it get that tapeworm from. And then they got to go find out which organism passed it on to them, like the sheep or whatever. They got to find out what the source of the infection is. Because again, if it gets into people, it can be devastating. Multilocularis, kind of the same thing, but instead of having one big cyst that's fluid filled, now they're multilocular cysts, okay? Like this. In this rodent, all of these little cyst things are full of the protoscolices, okay? Those things, depending on where that cyst is, will give you different signs. We treat or prevent this the same way. Don't let dogs eat rodents or the viscera of another animal. If they get it, again, they gotta go see their doctor, and this is reportable. So if you see tapeworms or tapeworm eggs in a dog, and that dog came from off in the mountains or something, been around sheep, and the first thing I'm going to do is find out if it's echinococcus. So that means I've got to get the dog to evacuate its bowels forcefully, so that then I can start looking for those tiny little tapeworms. The eggs themselves aren't going to tell me. I've got to see the tapeworms. Okay? All right, Hymenolipus nana is another one. It's a lot more common in certain areas of the world. This is because the insect, okay? The insect contains the cysticercoid, or the baby tapeworm, as it were. They can get it by just eating the eggs, okay? Hand-to-mouth infection, okay? Can go back and forth, back and forth. Hymenolipiasis causes enteritis, causes diarrhea, abdominal pain. You can get headaches and whatnot. But the problem is preventative. People have to be clean. They have to try to avoid getting these insects around. Those insects, not many people are going to eat them, but what if it's just in the food that they're eating? What if they got a bag full of something and it's inside there and they eat it mistakenly? Environment, hygiene, yeah, we don't want to see this kind of stuff where there's so much garbage around and rodents around, but now there's a possibility that that tapeworm is going to get transmitted. And then people got to see a doctor. That's pretty much the standard answer. If anybody thinks they have a parasite, the first thing you do is send them to their doctor. Okay, now, trematodes, and especially the blood flukes. These are the ones that are swimming around out in the water. And these cercarial organisms, like that metacercaria up there, that literally can perforate right through your skin, okay? Now, generally, we think of these in ducks, okay? Geese, things like that. But if you get in the water where these ducks and geese are defecating, and that's usually in the shallows, those metacercaria or cercarial organisms are going to be swimming around. And then you're walking in there and they start penetrating your skin. Mild case is not a big deal, makes it look funny and you itch, but severe exposure, here you can't see that well, but this person's legs are just covered with perforations. And this is what you can see. This is the sign that was out at Sand Hollow Reservoir. Okay? Some of my friends got it because they listened to what I was trying to tell them. Don't go walking around where these things can get into you. If you see somebody that's, hey, what's this on my leg? Uh-oh, you've been to Sand Hollow or someplace, haven't you? You went walking around in the water. Go see your doctor. All right, now we get into the protozoans. Protozoans, the one that most people don't know about that really should, is Toxoplasma gondii. Toxoplasma gondii, if it gets into a woman when she's pregnant, then that can give you congenital toxoplasmosis. The babies can get it. So if a woman eats the sporulated oocyst from out digging around in the dirt, gardening or whatever, or handling raw meat, and then putting something else on that same surface, and then eating the salad or whatever, that's how you can get this organism. Toxoplasmosis in congenital stages is devastating. Okay? Abortions, this is a baby with Toxoplasma gondii, congenital toxoplasmosis. One of the first things I always talk about is hydrocephalus. Well, there's a good example of it. If it gets acquired and it comes in after, now it can get into your lymph nodes, not just in infants, it can get into people. Lymphadenopathy, fever, myocarditis. Obviously, to prevent that, you want to make sure you're doing proper hygiene. You don't go out and dig in the garden or where cats may have defecated before, and then go in and eat something without washing your hands really well. If you have a cat in the house and you're pregnant, don't touch the litter box. It's not worth the risk. Make someone else do it. Make sure you clean up, proper food care, proper hygiene. And this is one of the biggest sources. You've got meats or animals that may have been infected with toxoplasmosis. You prepare the meat, and you bring in salad-like material, and on the same cutting board, you get your salad ready, and then put it in the bowl, and you eat the salad. It could have the oocyst on it. Okay? This is bad news because it can lead to severe changes in behavior. Okay? If they think they have it, or if they have a cat that has toxoplasmosis, then you got to send them to a doctor. Okay? Cryptosporidium is not really a big problem in normal, healthy people, but if we take the oocysts in by either contaminated water or fecal material from calves, then we can get cryptosporidiosis. In acute cases, bad diarrhea that gives you cramps. The biggest problem in immunocompromised people is it's chronic wasting disease. Cryptosporidiosis is commonly passed by calves because calves get it. Bovines are the ones that get it. But it can also be through water. And there have been water sources in certain towns that have been infected with cryptosporidium. And they end up having to put signs up. Before you use anything in your house, boil the water. Because they can't get rid of this through the water treatment plants. That's how small those organisms are. And if they get it, obviously they've got to go and see a doctor. All right. So those are the ones we have to talk about for people zoonotic diseases, okay? And why you need to know about these things so you can talk to the owners, especially if there's a possibility that their children are going to get infected, things like that. Okay?